Maybe you've felt this before. You're at home. The day has finally loosened its grip. Your thoughts are beginning to slow down. Then the doorbell rings. Not a dramatic moment, not a crisis. Just someone wanting to come in, to visit, to talk, to be present. And yet, something inside you resists. It's not fear, it's not anger, it's not hatred toward the world. It's a quiet tightening in the chest, a subtle withdrawal, an instinctive no before words even form. You don't dislike people. You can enjoy conversation. You may even be warm, thoughtful, and deeply empathetic. But when someone crosses the threshold of your personal space, something changes. Your energy shifts. Your inner rhythm is interrupted, and almost immediately you feel tired. If this sounds familiar, pause for a moment. Take a breath, because what you're experiencing is far more common and far more meaningful than society likes to admit. We live in a world that quietly celebrates openness, availability, constant connection. Doors should be open, messages should be answered, presence should be shared. So when someone feels uncomfortable with visitors, especially unexpected ones, they often feel guilt layered on top of that discomfort. Why am I like this? Why can't I just relax? Why do I need so much space? But what if this reaction isn't a flaw? What if it's a signal? According to Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century, our relationship with solitude reveals something fundamental about the structure of our inner world. Jung wasn't interested in surface behavior. He wasn't asking who talks more or who enjoys parties. He was asking a deeper question: where does your energy come from and where does it go? For some people, energy flows outward. Interaction stimulates them. The presence of others sharpens their sense of self. But for others, energy moves inward. And when too much comes from the outside, something inside begins to shut down. Not because it's broken, but because it's overwhelmed. If you belong to this second group, your home is not merely a place to sleep. It is an extension of your psyche. It's where your thoughts untangle, where emotions settle, where meaning quietly reorganizes itself beneath awareness. When someone enters that space, even kindly, they don't just step onto your floor, they step into your inner landscape. And suddenly you are no longer resting in yourself, you're performing. You activate a version of yourself that speaks, responds, smiles, listens, adjusts. Jung called this the persona, the social mask we wear to function in the world. The persona is not fake, but it is not the core of who you are, and maintaining it requires energy. So when someone enters your home, your mind doesn't simply greet them, it switches modes. What others experience as hospitality, you experience as inner labor. This is why the discomfort can feel confusing. On the outside, nothing is wrong. The visitor is polite. The conversation is normal. But inside, you feel yourself moving away from something essential. And the more you ignore that feeling, the more exhausted you become. Modern culture often labels this response as antisocial or withdrawn, but Jung would argue that it's something else entirely. It's self-regulation, an instinctive boundary drawn by the psyche to preserve balance. In the same way the body needs rest after exertion, the inward-oriented mind needs periods of protected silence. Not isolation forever, not rejection of humanity, but containment. The problem arises when people force themselves to violate this inner rhythm. They host when they're depleted. They agree when they're empty. They smile while quietly collapsing inward. Over time, this creates resentment, not toward others, but toward life itself. And the tragedy is that many never realize why. They assume something is wrong with them. But Jung believed the opposite. He believed that honoring one's psychological nature was not selfish. It was necessary for growth. And that begins with understanding why your relationship with personal space feels so intense. In the next part, we'll explore why introversion is not a preference, but a deep orientation of the soul, and how ignoring it slowly disconnects you from your inner center. Carl Jung believed that not everything within us is visible to our conscious mind. In fact, he argued that a large part of who we are lives below the surface, quiet, unacknowledged, and often misunderstood. He called this hidden territory the shadow. The shadow is not evil. It's not something dark in a moral sense. It's simply everything in you that was never fully welcomed, traits you learned to suppress, emotions that felt unsafe to express, needs that were inconvenient, reactions that didn't fit the image you were expected to present. Over time, these parts didn't disappear, they went underground. And this is where things become interesting. When someone enters your home, you're not just opening a physical door, you're opening access to the place where your energy is most unfiltered. At home, you're not performing, you're not adjusting, you're not managing impressions, you're closer to your raw inner state. And that's exactly where the shadow lives. This is why the discomfort can feel so disproportionate. Someone rings the doorbell, you sit down, the conversation begins. Nothing objectively wrong is happening, and yet something inside you tightens. A vague unease, a restlessness, a sense that your internal balance has been disturbed. Often you can't even explain it. But Jung would say this discomfort is not random. The presence of another person can unconsciously activate parts of your shadow, especially those you've worked hard not to feel. Their tone of voice, their expectations, their emotional energy, all of it interacts with your unconscious in ways you don't control. Perhaps they unknowingly remind you of a past dynamic. Perhaps their presence highlights an aspect of yourself you've been avoiding. Perhaps their attention pulls you outward when your psyche needs to remain inward. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same. Your inner system goes on alert. This is why Jung warned that what remains unconscious doesn't simply stay hidden. It expresses itself indirectly. He famously wrote that what we fail to bring into awareness will appear in our lives as fate, not dramatic destiny, not cosmic punishment, but patterns, reactions that don't seem logical, emotions that feel exaggerated, irritation that arrives without a clear cause. In this context, fate may look like social discomfort. A visit that should be pleasant suddenly feels invasive. A friendly presence creates an almost physical urge for withdrawal. You find yourself counting minutes, craving silence, wanting the space back. From the outside, this can be misread as coldness. From the inside, it feels like self-preservation. And that's because, on an unconscious level, it is. The shadow often contains vulnerability, unresolved grief, old shame, a fear of being seen too closely. When someone enters your home, they enter a space where these elements are closer to the surface. Your psyche senses exposure, and so it reacts, not with words, but with discomfort. This is important to understand. The shadow does not speak rationally. It communicates through mood, sensation, impulse. You don't think, this person is threatening my inner balance. You feel tension, you feel drained, you feel the need for distance. And if you've spent years being told that this reaction is wrong, that you should be more open, more welcoming, more relaxed, you may have learned to override it. But Jung believed that ignoring the shadow only strengthens it. The more you suppress these signals, the more intensely they return. This is why some people feel a growing aversion to visitors over time, not because they dislike others, but because they've repeatedly ignored their own psychological limits. Each unacknowledged boundary becomes stored tension. Each forced interaction adds another layer to the shadow, until the discomfort becomes impossible to ignore. What you're experiencing then is not antisocial behavior. It's your unconscious drawing a line, a quiet message that says, something here needs protection. In the next part, we'll explore how modern society trains us to betray these signals and why honoring them is essential for psychological integrity, not selfishness. One of the most misunderstood things about the shadow is this: it doesn't only contain what is broken or painful, it also holds what is unfinished, unexpressed abilities, unlived possibilities, truths you sensed but never fully embodied. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is not just a container for darkness, it is a reservoir of potential, and potential needs space, silence, time, privacy. When your life is filled with constant adaptation, being polite, available, agreeable, your inner world begins to shrink. You may still function, you may still show up, but something deeper struggles to breathe. So when you feel an almost instinctive pull towards solitude, when the idea of visitors feels overwhelming, it may not be avoidance at all. It may be your shadow whispering, "You need yourself right now." And listening to that voice, truly listening, is not weakness. It is courage. Think about that moment at the end of a long day. You come home, the door closes behind you, shoes come off, your shoulders drop. For the first time in hours, you don't have to adjust. You don't have to respond. You don't have to be anything. You simply are. According to Carl Jung, this experience is not accidental. In Jungian symbolism, the home is far more than a building. It is a mirror of the psyche, a symbolic representation of the self. Jung believed that symbols often reveal truths the conscious mind struggles to articulate. And the house is one of the most powerful symbols we have. It represents the inner structure of your being, the place where balance is restored and meaning quietly reorganizes itself. Each part of the house reflects a different layer of the psyche. The bedroom symbolizes intimacy and vulnerability. The living room represents the persona, the version of you shown to others. The kitchen speaks to nourishment, both emotional and psychological. The basement holds what is unconscious and unresolved. The attic reflects higher thought, reflection, and imagination. And the front door? The front door is the boundary. It separates inner from outer, self from other, silence from stimulation. When someone crosses that threshold, something subtle happens. Your unconscious registers it immediately. This is not just another person entering a room. It is external energy entering an internal system. Their mood, their expectations, their stories, their emotional tension. Even if they are kind, even if they mean well, they bring otherness with them. And if you are sensitive, especially if you are introverted or deeply reflective, your psyche must work to accommodate that. Jung called the process of becoming one's true self individuation. It is not a loud or dramatic path. It is slow, quiet, often solitary. Individuation requires protected space, moments where the soul can reorganize without interruption. So if you are in the middle of this process, whether you realize it or not, unexpected visits can feel draining, not because you dislike others, but because your inner world is still forming, still integrating, still under construction. Jung never saw the house as a fortress built to keep the world out. He saw it as an inner mirror. If you feel peace at home, it often means something inside you is in alignment. But if visits disrupt your calm, disturb the atmosphere, or fracture the silence, that may be your unconscious saying, "Not all doors are ready to be opened yet." And that is not a failure, that is wisdom. In depth psychology, boundaries are not barriers, they are conditions for healing. Respecting your need for solitude is not isolation, it is integration. When you protect your space, you protect the slow, invisible work happening within. And yet many people ignore this instinct. They smile politely, make coffee, engage in small talk, all while thinking quietly, when will this end? They feel guilty for wanting silence. But what they're really experiencing is a conflict between outer expectations and inner truth. In the next part, we'll explore why forced social availability slowly erodes authenticity and how learning to say no can be one of the most psychologically mature acts a person can make. Doesn't it feel strange? You're polite, you're welcoming, you do everything right, and yet, somewhere underneath that friendliness you feel depleted, almost guilty, as if wanting quiet makes you ungrateful, as if needing space makes you cold. But this inner conflict has a name. According to Carl Jung, every human being develops what he called the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to move through the world. It's how we speak at work, how we behave in social settings, how we adapt to expectations, roles, and norms. The persona is not a lie, it's a tool. Without it, society would be impossible. We would constantly offend, overwhelm, or misunderstand one another. But here's the problem. The persona is only a fragment of who you are. It is the most acceptable version of you, the most presentable, the least disruptive. And when that fragment becomes dominant, when it takes over spaces where it doesn't belong, the psyche begins to protest. Your home is supposed to be the place where the persona rests, where effort dissolves, where control softens, where you don't have to manage yourself. But for many people, especially introverted, sensitive, and observant individuals, the persona doesn't come off easily. A visitor arrives, and suddenly you're on. You monitor your tone, you track your facial expressions, you adjust your posture. Your mind splits in multiple directions at once. Am I being attentive enough? Is the room comfortable? How long has it been? Do I need to offer something? Should I keep the conversation going? Each of these small adjustments consumes psychic energy, not physical energy, psychological energy, and it adds up quickly. Jung emphasized that the persona is necessary but dangerous when overused. He warned that when people confuse the persona with their true self, something inside begins to suffer. The soul, as he put it, starts to cry out. That cry doesn't always sound dramatic. Often it sounds like resistance, a heavy feeling when the doorbell rings, an urge to cancel, an almost physical need for silence. This resistance isn't rudeness, it's exhaustion. Not exhaustion from people, but exhaustion from performing. When you're required to maintain a social image in the very place where you should be able to drop it, the psyche experiences a contradiction. You're being asked to be outward in a space meant for inwardness, and over time this creates irritation, not because you dislike others, but because you're being pulled away from yourself. Many people live like this for years. They host, they smile, they engage, and inside they feel increasingly empty. They don't realize what's happening because the persona is socially rewarded. People say, "You're so kind, so welcoming, so easy to talk to." But what no one sees is the quiet cost, the loss of inner contact, the fading connection to silence, the slow erosion of authenticity. Depth psychology offers a liberating perspective here. You are not obligated to perform in your own sanctuary. You are allowed to be unavailable. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to protect your inner rhythm. This isn't selfishness, it's self-respect. Jung believed that psychological health requires balance between outer adaptation and inner truth. When you sacrifice the inner world to maintain external harmony, the psyche rebels. It does so subtly, through fatigue, irritability, withdrawal. But those reactions are not mistakes, they are signals, and learning to honor them is a profound act of maturity, because every time you prioritize pleasing others over listening to yourself, something important is abandoned, not relationships, not politeness, your own center. In the next part, we'll explore why saying no creates guilt, where that guilt actually comes from, and how reclaiming your right to solitude strengthens, not weakens, your connection to others. There are moments when the desire to be alone appears quietly. No drama, no sadness, no crisis, just a subtle inner pull towards silence. And yet many people immediately judge this impulse. They label it antisocial, unhealthy, selfish. After all, we live in a culture that admires visibility, being busy, being surrounded, being constantly available. Silence, on the other hand, is often misunderstood. But Carl Jung saw something profound in the urge to withdraw. For Jung, retreat was not avoidance. It was often the beginning of one of the most important inner movements a person can experience. He called it individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are, not who you were trained to be, not who others needed you to become, not the version of yourself that fits most easily into social roles, but the deeper self, the one that includes contradiction, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability. And this process does not unfold in noise, it unfolds in quiet, in pauses, in spaces where the external world loosens its grip. This is why discomfort around visitors isn't always emotional instability or laziness. Sometimes it is intelligence. Your psyche recognizes that too much stimulation is drowning out something essential. Something inside you is trying to surface, but it can only do so when the volume of the outside world is turned down. Jung believed that many people feel lonely not because they lack company, but because they lack contact with their inner truth. You can be surrounded by others and still feel profoundly disconnected because the conversations don't touch what matters, because the atmosphere doesn't allow depth, because you're forced to stay on the surface. True solitude, in contrast, is not emptiness, it is immersion. It is the state in which thoughts settle long enough for insight to emerge. This is why some phases of life naturally demand isolation, not permanent withdrawal, not rejection of relationships, but conscious distance. You don't step away to disappear. You step away to return more fully formed, clearer, more honest, more grounded in yourself. The problem is that modern life rarely respects this rhythm. There is always another invitation, another expectation, another knock at the door, and each one pulls you outward, even when your inner world is asking for something else. So when you feel resistance, when the idea of entertaining guests feels heavy, it may not be fear or dislike, it may be timing. Your psyche knows that something important is being worked on internally, and interruption would fracture that process. Jung understood that the soul has its own seasons, times of outward expansion and times of inward consolidation. Trying to remain socially open during an inward phase creates friction, exhaustion, irritability, a sense of being fragmented. This is why silence can feel not just comforting, but necessary. It's where you hear what you've been avoiding, where unformed thoughts finally take shape, where meaning begins to reorganize itself. And yet saying no to visitors during these phases often brings guilt. You worry you're being difficult, that you're disappointing others, that you're doing something wrong. But what if the opposite is true? What if honoring the need for solitude is a form of responsibility to yourself? The inner world doesn't shout, it whispers, and if you don't create conditions to hear it, its messages become distorted. They emerge as stress, as numbness, as a vague sense of dissatisfaction with life. But when you allow yourself space, real space, you don't lose connection to others. You strengthen it because you return with presence instead of depletion, with authenticity instead of obligation. So if your inner voice says stay a moment longer, don't open the door yet, that is not avoidance, that is wisdom. In the next part, we'll explore why modern society struggles to understand this need and how reclaiming solitude in a noisy world is one of the most radical psychological acts you can make. Maybe you felt it while listening, that quiet sense of relief, that deep calm that arrives when someone finally gives language to something you felt for years but never knew how to explain. That feeling is important because what you've long seen as a personal flaw, this discomfort with visitors, this almost physical unease, may actually be a reflection of something profound. If Carl Jung was sitting beside you now with his calm and penetrating gaze, he might say something like this: "You are not wrong for wanting to be alone. You are listening to the voice of your soul, and that is rare." So let's bring this understanding into focus. Here are 6 deep truths from Jungian psychology about people who prefer solitude, especially in their own home. First, you are more sensitive to energy than you realize. Jung believed that the unconscious perceives far more than the conscious mind ever could. Some people are especially attuned to subtle signals, tone of voice, unspoken tension, emotional undercurrents. When someone enters your home, they don't arrive alone. They bring their inner world with them, unfinished emotions, worries, expectations. You may not consciously register any of this, but your nervous system does. What others shrug off, you absorb, and that absorption feels like heaviness, like restlessness, like fatigue without a clear cause. Second, your psyche needs space to stay in balance. Jung did not view introversion as a preference. He saw it as a psychological requirement. Silence allows your inner world to reorganize itself. Thoughts settle, emotions find their place, meaning begins to surface. A single visit, especially an unexpected one, can disrupt this delicate alignment. What looks like laziness from the outside is often your system trying to breathe again. Third, too much social presence pulls you away from yourself. Jung believed that the true self emerges only in inner stillness, polite conversation, constant availability, maintaining harmony. All of this requires you to step slightly away from your center. It's not that you dislike people, it's that being with others often requires you to suspend parts of yourself. And when that happens, too often, something essential begins to fade. Fourth, other people can activate your shadow. The shadow holds everything unresolved, old wounds, suppressed emotions, unintegrated parts of your personality. Sometimes all it takes is a casual remark from a visitor, a tone, a story, a way of being, and suddenly irritation rises, not because the person did anything wrong, but because they touched something unfinished within you. The discomfort isn't about them, it's about what they awaken. Fifth, withdrawal can signal the beginning of individuation. Individuation, for Jung, meant becoming who you truly are. And that process often begins the moment you stop trying to please the world, when you recognize that you need time, silence, and distance, not to escape life, but to meet it more honestly. Periods of solitude are not regressions, they are preparations. Sixth, wanting solitude is a sign of inner honesty. This is the truth most people never hear. The desire to be alone is not weakness, it is integrity. It means you are no longer willing to betray your inner rhythm just to appear agreeable. You are choosing alignment over approval. And that choice, quiet as it may be, is transformative. In the final part, we'll bring everything together and talk about how to live this truth without guilt, how to protect your inner space without cutting yourself off from life, and why honoring your nature is the foundation of real psychological freedom. At some point, something shifts. You stop fighting the feeling, you stop explaining yourself, you stop apologizing for needing space. You finally begin to listen. You learn to say no without guilt, to close the door without a heavy conscience, to protect your boundaries without feeling rude or defective, because you've realized something essential. Every time you are kind when you don't have the energy to be, every time you smile out of obligation, every time you host, entertain, or engage, while quietly exhausted, you abandon yourself to fit into someone else's rhythm, and you can't live like that anymore. Now picture this image. An old man with a long white beard walks alone through the night. In his hand, he carries a lantern. The path is quiet. The world is dark, but the light he carries is steady. This is the ancient figure of the hermit. In Jungian psychology, the hermit is not a lonely exile. He is an archetype. According to Carl Jung, archetypes are universal patterns, primordial energies that live within every human being, whether we recognize them or not. The hermit represents the inner call to withdraw, not to escape life, but to understand it, not to reject others, but to reconnect with oneself. The hermit turns away from noise because he knows something most people forget. Only in stillness does true insight appear. This archetype does not symbolize emptiness or emotional isolation. It symbolizes courage, the courage to face one's own shadow, to sit with doubt, to listen without distraction, and in doing so to discover an inner light that cannot be given by anyone else. No visitor can hand it to you, no conversation can replace it, no approval can substitute for it. This light is found only inward, and to find it, the hermit needs a sacred space. Very often, that space is your home, your quiet, your retreat, your closed door. So if you feel an almost irresistible pull to remain alone, if the idea of hosting drains you before it even begins, if silence feels nourishing while social presence feels heavy, it may not be avoidance, it may be your inner hermit calling. He asks you to slow down, to stop scattering your energy, to step out of the constant demand to be available. Jung believed that answering this call is essential to psychological health. Ignoring it leads to fragmentation, to burnout, to a life lived outwardly but not inwardly. And here's the part few people talk about. Choosing solitude in a world obsessed with connection is an act of resistance. It resists superficiality. It resists constant stimulation. It resists the idea that your worth depends on accessibility. This is not selfishness, it is self-care at the level of the soul. So the next time someone asks why you prefer to be alone, why you don't enjoy visitors, why you guard your space so carefully, remember the hermit within you. He stands quietly with his lantern, reminding you that true light is not found in constant exposure, but after you've had the courage to walk into your own darkness, and that it is completely okay, necessary even, to need silence in order to find yourself again. Because solitude, when embraced consciously, is not emptiness. It is depth. It is not about being alone, but about what you allow to emerge when you finally are. And that may be the most honest life you can live.